Good morning. Welcome back to the Vitality Project. I'm Dr. Bob. Yesterday, we introduced an exploration of the phrase addiction as a spiritual problem with a spiritual solution. What we discussed was a distinction that the German language makes between natural science, the German word for that is Naturswissenschaften, and spiritual science, which doesn't quite translate into English very well. The German word for that, as we talked about yesterday, is Geisteswissenschaften. And what I introduced further was that there was a 19th century very significant teacher of philosophy in Vienna, Franz Brentano, who used this very same distinction to get at a very important difference in scientific perspective. And that difference is this, that there are sciences that examine things objectively or from the outside. Think, for example, of geology or chemistry. But there are other sciences, according to Brentano in this tradition, that need to be examined from the inside or subjectively. And the most obvious example of that is human psychology. And this is why Brentano was so significant in terms of teaching psychologists. I'm going to forget to mention this, and this might be of interest to you. Brentano was the professor who taught Sigmund Freud, who's the father of modern psychoanalysis, which looks at things subjectively from the inside. He was also the teacher of Karl Stumpf, who ended up being the founder of another very significant strand or tradition within psychology, Gestalt psychology. And then a third student of Brentano's was Edmund Husserl. And Husserl is the father of an approach in philosophy that's had huge influence. And I'll talk more about this a little bit later, not technically, but just to try to understand this word. Husserl is the father of philosophical, what's referred to as phenomenology. And that's a big word for just talking about understanding everything that you look at, not just from the outside, but also from the inside, to understand phenomena subjectively. So get an idea of the impact of, in the 19th century, Brentano's students moved in the latter part of the 19th century into the 20th century and really changed the way that the contemporary Western man and woman understands virtually everything. Going back to Brentano, with objective science or natural science, Naturswissenschaften, for example, we can weigh a person and we can get other objective information about what who that person is by using just objective measurements. This, for example, would be the domain of much of contemporary medicine. But if I want to understand what a person thinks or feels or imagines or even dreams, well, then I've got to enter into a dialogue with that person. Put another way, subjective information about someone's insides, their inner world, it's only obtainable through conversation. You can't analyze that or even access that from the outside. Natural science won't work to get at that. So let's talk about it yet another way. You don't need to interview a rock. That's the domain of geology. You don't need to interview a rock to understand its most essential properties. However, you must interview a person if your goal is to understand what that person thinks. And if that's essential to your study, you must interview them. Naturswissenschaften, natural science, then works fine with rocks. But Geisteswissenschaften, the so-called spiritual sciences, are quite necessary for understanding the depths within any human being. So what I'm doing here in these past two blog posts is setting up a critically important perspective for our looking at the language of addiction recovery, specifically the very common understanding that that addiction is a spiritual problem requiring a spiritual solution. I'd like you to come back tomorrow because we're going to dive even deeper into this question. It has a lot of very practical implications, and I'll be sharing those with you over the next few video posts. I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a brilliantly wonderful day, and I'll see you tomorrow.